All right, everybody. Okay, welcome to this edition of 39 Down. And I have a special guest. Oh my guest, I think I say I have a special guest every time, but they're so special. You will love this interview today. I have my special guest with me. Joy Soleil is here. And I will introduce her very briefly, and she'll tell us a lot more about herself. And I really, really believe that you will enjoy this episode today. So, welcome to 39 Down, our mind body podcast. And we'll jump right into it. So, Joy Soleil is the founder and CEO of Soleil Ventures, and she's helping heart centered executive and leaders secure abundance and feel like rock stars in all areas of life: relationship, health, wealth, career. That was the French career. Career. And so here we go. So thank you, Joy, for being with us.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here.
And I'll let you know, I keep telling my husband I want to call her Joie because if you have Soleil, you need to be Joie. So,
I am Joie. You can call me Joie. My husband calls me Joie.
oh, really? Yeah, okay. It just seems like I can't say Joy Soleil. You have to say Joie Soleil.
Yes, you can. You're welcome to.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you for being with us. And our topic today, guys, is simply and not so simply experiences and how they shape us, and how previous experiences carry us and go along with us and come back to either boost us or haunt us. Uh, and so, Joy, I want to ask you the first question. I was very, in the title, I didn't want to put the word trauma in there. I know everybody throws out the word trauma, right? And then we have the ones that say, well, I don't have any trauma in my life, because I had a normal childhood and nothing specific, nothing grand or traumatic, as you will say, happened to me. So, and then we have the others on the other side, people that keep saying, well, this was trauma, and this happened, and that was another trauma and another trauma and another trauma. So can you help us understand, how experiences do become trauma, and do we have some experiences that are uh, maybe not seemingly traumatic that actually cause trauma?
Mm. Yeah, those are some great questions. Well, I think first of all, I know that trauma is a trigger word and nobody wants to acknowledge that they have any.
Mhm.
Or you have an over acknowledgement of it where we're not really victimized. And I don't mean to dismiss victimization at all where it does happen, but in many cases, we're getting upset over things like customer service agents not doing what we want them to do, or serving us the way that we think that we should be served, when really that branches back to some kind of trauma early on in life.
Right.
And I've had this conversation with my husband many, many times, and also many other people who say, no, not everybody has trauma. And my husband will say, well, but Michael Jordan, initially he said, Michael Jordan, he had a great upbringing. And he became this, like, powerful athlete that has been so inspiring to all of us. But I would argue that no, trauma can be as simple as somebody saying, you're never gonna make it.
Mm.
It doesn't have to be like, some big event that alters your life. But essentially what trauma is you're on a track in life and you're going down this path, and then there's something that knocks you off of that path. That's
Mm.
all that trauma is. It's just something that
Ah.
knocks you off of your expectation, so to speak. So
Mm.
even someone one time saying you're never going to make it is that can be enough to make you go, oh, well, I'll show you. And here's the trauma that helps facilitate your future. And so
Mm.
anyone that says, no, I don't have any kind of trauma, I feel very sorry to hear that, because it's trauma that helps launch us into deeper things in life where we get to choose out of that trauma whether we become hero or victim.
Mm. Right. hero victim, right? Because when you said I'll show you, I'm thinking, oh, shrink. Right? Because it could be that you take on the like the challenge, I guess, in the case of you never going to make it, you can decide to take on the challenge, or you can accept and internalize what the person is saying and agree, and then not make it, right?
Right. Right. Well, it's interesting how all of that ties back to identity.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
in our early formative years, between 0 and 7 or so, we see the world through the ego. And that's
Mhm.
just like the way God designed us so that we can survive. We have to see ourselves through the ego and see our experiences through ego. So the question that we're always asking ourselves is, well, what does this mean about me? Every experience, what does this mean about me? So
Right.
even young children, mom and dad are fighting, or even they get divorced. It's like, what does this mean about me? Oh, it's my fault, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how children process these things. So that's the stories that we create back in those early formative years are really essential to how we create story for the rest of our lives.
Right.
And it's not that it can't be undone, but of course, as you get older, it takes more work
Yeah.
because you're like, oh, I've created some stories that aren't really toxic, that are really toxic for me. And
Mm-hmm.
story is not synonymous with truth necessarily. That's just how
Mm-hmm.
you see the world. So in those early experiences, it can even be the stories that we put behind experiences that create further trauma and put us
Mm-hmm.
in those positions where we're like, oh man, they said that I wasn't good enough, or whatever it may be. In Michael Jordan's case, it probably was just having an older brother that got some kind of preferential treatment that
Probably.
won't settle over and over again. And he's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'll show you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how, we get the world's either most influential people for better or worse,
Mm-hmm.
because either we're attaching ourselves to victimization or we're attaching ourselves to heroism.
Hmm. Very, very, very interesting. Yeah, and I think again, when we think of trauma, we think about those big events, and some people, then you don't necessarily think that you can rise from trauma.
Mm.
We often see trauma as something negative, and the way you're presenting it, it's like it's just an experience, it's part of your existence, and based on your identity and then based on your reaction to it and so on, it can either be, I guess, building negative, positive, or building, or it can be negative, destroying you or shrinking you down.
Yeah. And we're the only ones who get to choose that for ourselves. Nobody else can choose that. And it's a choice. It's really in micro choices and in how we're processing things as we continue on in life. And I think it's great if we think, oh, I'm going to get to the bottom of my healing, or,
Mhm.
I'm done. If you're done healing, then you're probably dead.
It's like healing and enlightenment, and just, it's just always there, so when you say you've achieved, that's it. Because yeah, if you've achieved, then that's the end, then yeah,
Yeah. And I'm not
uh,
saying you got to walk around being busted up all the time. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that there's always layers. So what
yeah.
happens is, we do so much work on ourselves. Even people who do the most work on themselves, they get to a certain point and they're like, golly, like I'm reeling back. And it's like, have I regressed? Here I
Hmm.
am again at the same problem. And then we put shame on top of our our
Right, right.
experiences, when it's not supposed to be shame based. It's just like, hey, we have new layers. There's always a new layer of healing that has to take place, and a new
Yeah.
level of awareness. So that's another way that we can, how we see ourselves in that determines whether or not we're going to overcome those experiences. And sometimes it's
Hmm.
cyclical from childhood, and it's not until we say, you know what, it's going to be different from here on out. Not another day, not another hour. I'm not going to suffer with this anymore. And it doesn't mean that you never have to look at it again. It just means that it's not going to control you anymore. Until we look
Right.
at it controls us.
Right, right. Yeah, and you mentioned something, I call it, our God-given right. There's only one thing that we have is choice.
Yeah.
When because choice, everything depends on that choice, right?
Right.
And so when you make the choice based on, I guess, what you know, based on your identity that you have of yourself and all those different things, but they feed into the choice that you're going to make. And so the choice in itself then activates, am I going to be a victim, or I'm going to be again a hero? Am I going to do the work? I'm going to just accept, okay, this is just how I am, and this is just how it's going to be, and this is the story of my life, the
Mhm.
end, pretty much. Or am I going to choose differently? And the Bible again, choose, life or death. Choose what you. Every time you have that choice, and we sometimes put it into the religious, the religious aspect of life.
Mhm.
And there's just that. Um, and they call it spiritual, but we are spiritual. Every aspect of our life, right?
Mm.
Is spiritual, and so everything that we do, there is a choice, and it's amazing that when you're saying that, it just makes me all bubbly. Of course, as you see,
Yeah.
as you see, let you talk because you're my teacher today.
No.
It helps me understand, how again every aspect of life, choice comes into play, and then as we make the decision, then we go one direction or another. But it keeps, like you said, the layers coming in every time. Then we're invited to make a choice again and again and again and again.
Right. Right. And how we really know if we're making good choices is what our self-talk is.
Mm.
How do we speak to ourselves on a consistent basis? And I think it's we do push a lot of blame to the outside world,
Mm.
um, as far as our circumstances. Well, if only the government was better, the economy was better, if this hadn't happened to me, if my spouse was better. And ultimately, I think what we're doing is projecting something that feels too heavy for us because who we're really blaming is ourselves.
Right, but we can't bear it, so we put it on somebody else. But
That's
what
right.
do you say to people who feel that way? Like, especially if you had maybe a loved one dying and you're grieving, and you say, "Well, it's not my choice, right? It's not my choice to feel that way. It's not my choice to be in that situation. It's not my choice to have lost my job and now I don't have this." And what. What can you say to people that are in that situation?
Well, we certainly can't choose what happens around us or what happens to us, and we can't choose what other people do for sure.
Mm.
I think that's where a lot of our unhappiness comes from, is when we put so much into trying to control what other people are going to do or what the outcomes of our lives are going to be in different areas that we
Mhm.
cannot control. We're not meant to control that. But what we can control is the meaning that we give it.
Mhm.
So if you go through a series of events, and maybe it could be just as simple as, man, like I keep stubbing my toe, or uh it's like everything, nothing seems to be
Mhm.
going right.
Right.
But the choice is in how we give that meaning. So assigning a meaning like nothing is going right, or maybe
Mhm.
I'm just meant to live in financial chaos and disorder, or whatever it may be, that's
Mhm.
a choice.
Right.
Just because things are happening to you that feel bad doesn't mean
Mhm.
that there's something bad happening against you,
Right.
and
Or that you are bad.
or that you are bad, because ultimately
Mhm.
that's what it comes down to. And especially, I think, women, good grief, we are so hard on ourselves. And what it always comes back to is, I'm not enough.
Mhm.
Almost always, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I don't have enough. I'm not enough, especially when we're spread thin with working and raising children and keeping a spouse and keeping house and home and all of that stuff that is expected of us. And now we're supposed to get down on the floor and play blocks with our kids while we're doing all these. It's like, come on, something's got to give. Um,
Mhm.
but no, I think we put so much pressure on ourselves, and then it awakens the feeling inside of us from childhood that
Mm.
somehow we're not enough, we're not giving enough, and oh, that's why things are not working, that's why I'm frustrated. But it has nothing, very little to do with identity, and
Mhm.
more to do with circumstances. And if you don't like where you live, I mean, you can move, right? it's easier said than done, but you can make
Right.
changes. If you're not happy with your body, you can eat differently and exercise. There are
Right.
things that you can do, even
Mhm.
with disease in the body, there are things that you can do. There's always something you can do. There's always a solution.
Right. That's the key. There's always something that you can do. Like you may not be able to do the thing, like you say, for example, you can move, right? Like at this moment, you might not be able to move, but what can you do to maybe not be in the house as much, or maybe, you have to go more on walks more, or, can you just, finding yourself in different situation to not have to be in that one environment, especially if, if there's danger or if it's toxic or whatever have you, and then building, how can I save, or, where would I go? Am I looking for a different job? All those different things as you go. So I like something somebody told me. I'm trying to think, it's my husband, may have been. It said, you are in the, we talk about goals. Yeah, it was him. You talk about goals as something that we have to achieve, right? Or we have to get to. But understanding that the goal is an ongoing process. From the time you set the goal, you are now in the goal, right? So
Mm.
you are moving towards, you're not moving towards it, you're moving within it, right? And so if you're saying, for example, again, I need to move, then I am moving, right? So I'm making, every single step is in the motion part of the gears, right? To
Mm.
get to that. uh I don't say that it's not even a result, because you're living in the result, if that make any
Living in the
sense,
result, yes.
right? And so yeah, I see what you're saying. There's always something that you can do, and it's never too far if you start taking steps, right?
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
again, in those micro choices, I think even the goal can be very overwhelming, and all of the steps that you perceive between where you are and where you think the goal is can be very
Mm-hmm.
overwhelming. So I think it's really great to have that principle of, no, I'm already in it. And I have an example of this from my own experience,
Mm-hmm.
because I was a single mom with 3 kids. I lived in a really rough neighborhood. I owned my home, and it was just so cheap to live there that I didn't want, I don't want to go anywhere else, but I
Right.
couldn't let my kids play outside safely.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to take little steps where, at first I painted my front door, and I
Mm-hmm.
started to clean clutter in the home. I started acting like I was going to move.
Mm-hmm.
I started like fixing up the house and making it look nice. I hung some artwork even, and
Mm-hmm.
I made the house more comfortable and palatable to be there while I was there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in these little steps. And you asked me the question earlier too, like, how do you kind of keep in step with um, progressing while you're in the middle? Like, what would I say to people who are in the middle of some kind of chaos? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I was preparing for a talk on peace, and as you know, in my bedroom one night, and my neighbors started to shoot each other in my front lawn, and
Nice.
sort of a normal thing that happened in that neighborhood, but not on my front lawn. So
Mm-hmm.
I found
Mm-hmm.
myself in the middle of preparing for this peace talk on the floor of my bedroom, dodging bullets. And, it's just interesting how everything conspired. But that was sort of like one of the things that pushed me to the edge. And I was like, golly, here I am, like making a talk. If you can't make a talk about peace while on the floor of a, war zone, so to speak, then I don't.
Right. You can.
That's where it really tests you, right? But it led me to move finally where I thought it was still impossible to do so. And it was like one door opened up after another. I had been spending like, all of 2 years preparing and making those little micro choices, believing that it was going to happen somehow. And, the day that happened, I still didn't believe that I was quite that close. And
Mm-hmm.
yet it just shoved me out, and I was able to move into like a super nice neighborhood within a few months, which was
Mm-hmm.
shocking to me. But I say that because I think that oftentimes we find ourselves stuck, but the thing that's really keeping us stuck is the belief in our mind that we're stuck. And there's always a solution. There's always something we can do in those micro choices in the day to day. And even if you can't see it, you have to act in a way as though you're already in it and it's already happening,
Mhm.
just like I did.
Right, right.
And it's sort of like
I,
the lubrication in the whole process.
Well, let's talk about the mind, the what we believe, right? Because then how we live our experiences is based on what we believe, what we believe, and what we believe, and then also and our identity also shapes what we believe and how we live things, and so it just kind of all goes together. So what is going on in our mind? Can you explain to us, um I guess, how do we build up, how does the mind get built, or our feelings or our thoughts about ourselves then translate into what we think about different situations and how we live certain situations?
Yeah. I think
There's
we're
a big one, I
barely
know, but
beginning to scratch the surface of this, like just in, and there's a lot of talk about manifestation and all
mm,
of that, but we've been manifesting for a long time, and you are manifesting whether you recognize it or not. And where our thoughts lie is going to be very close to what we see in our day-to-day life. So if you're living your day-to-day life being really hard on yourself, like, F my life or whatever it is, uh,
mm,
you're going to find pieces of that. And I think, there's all kinds of ways that we bring things to order when we recognize first and foremost the thoughts that we're thinking over and over again. So take mothering for example. There was
mm,
a time when I was like, I'm losing my mind. That'd be the thing, like my go-to statement. I'm losing my mind.
right.
And I really started to feel like I was losing my
Hmm.
mind. And it just like hit me one day and I was like, I have got to change the language around
Right.
this. I've got, so every time I just, kids will make you feel like you're losing your mind, right? But I just started to shift that, like, okay, my mind is coming together in collective order more and more all the time. And
Mm.
I mean, we're living today what we created yesterday and what we spoke into existence yesterday. And if the power of death and life are in the tongue, then
Mhm.
what we said yesterday is coming to manifestation today.
Right. I have a question with that. Um, if I don't believe what I'm saying, if I'm saying my mind is coming together, but it's not, it's not. But because then we talk about affirmation and different things like that. But if I'm saying something like that, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Really, you know, I'm
Mm-hmm.
close to losing my mind, right? But I'm saying I am. I forget the wording that you use, which is pretty much the opposite of it's coming together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so is that creating some kind of dissonance within me, or is my mind actually and my body actually going to believe that, or how does that come about if I
At,
don't believe it, if
at
I don't
first,
feel
you're
it?
not going to believe it because that's not what you created up until now.
Okay,
And
okay,
so, I mean, your brain's going to be like, you're a freaking liar. And,
right.
like, I already know that that's not true,
Mm,
but it's in the persistence of it that you really see the changes happen. And you do it until you believe that it's happening.
mhm,
And I think sometimes, like, we think faith is like something that we just muster up, and if it's not there, then we just kind of drop it and, you know,
right.
don't bother asking anymore, don't bother praying about it anymore, whatever.
Mm,
When actually we need to train ourselves. And again, if we're operating based off of yesterday's creation, then that just means today we need to make different choices to get a different kind
mm,
of outcome for tomorrow.
yeah, yeah. And it's like you talk about prayer, and I grew up thinking, in a way, you pray to influence God, right? You pray to convince Him to do something for
Mm-hmm.
you, or to forgive you, or to, and understanding actually prayer is for you, is just like that exercise of, if I'm asking something and I don't believe it at first, right? It is growing the faith as I'm asking or as I'm saying thank you, really, because you ask and then you have to shift to gratitude as I'm learning. Because
Mm.
if you keep asking this, but if you start saying thank you and then saying it as though it is another verse, and it's not so much to change God's mind and convince Him to do it for you. It's so that you would believe it, right?
Mm.
And it becomes a part of you, and then you live it, and it becomes, then it is. And something that I did not understand until recently, because I think, the way we have it set up is, please God, please God, please God, and then we think, well, do I have enough faith now that He's going to, did I sprinkle enough faith on it that He's going to answer? Well, it's really, as I'm not sure, but I know what He's capable of, and I know that He loves me. I am asking, and then I am thanking Him, and like He said, I believe it. Right? It becomes, at first I don't think it is, but then it becomes the thing. It is here,
Mm.
right?
Yes, and I think if you see that as a relationship that you
Mhm.
get to ask, I mean, we don't get what we don't ask for, right? And at
Yes.
the same time, if your children are whining at you for the same thing
Mm.
over and over, is that not like the easiest way to get you to say no
Yeah.
sometimes? You're like, all right,
Yeah.
now you need to be quiet. I mean, either you give in out that where it's not good for them, or
Mhm.
you you dismiss their request.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah. 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 I think we missed the mark when we just think that it's a asking to pressure, while it's really a shift in our mind and a shift in our being that is really supposed to be.
mm.
Yeah.
And also, I think one of the things that we maybe miss in prayer is connection, where we're not speaking. So we're not
Mm.
asking for anything. But if we really sit still long enough, we can get a pretty good vision for what God wants for us, which is so much
Mhm.
bigger than what we would ever ask for or imagine for ourselves.
Mhm.
And if we allow that vision to come to us rather than forcing a visualization that
Mhm.
we are become frustrated over, and then, well, what good is that going to do us anyway? But we
Mhm.
match ourselves with the vibration of what God already has ordained for us. It makes
Mhm.
everything so much easier, and then we're just really coming into agreement with what God has ordained for us. And
Mhm.
we can ask by just simply saying thank you, which is what
Right.
you already said. So we can either ask for help or hold gratitude for what God is already doing, because it's already in motion.
Mhm.
So then we
Yeah.
don't have to convince anyone.
It's such a different, and you're saying it, and it's like, yeah, of course, but that's not, I'm thinking, these years, that's definitely not how. Uh, I can't speak for every Christian, but I know for me, that's not at all how I understood, prayer and stillness and all those different things that I'm now coming to understand, and it makes so much more sense now. Yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So when we talk about, uh, still on topic, but a little tangent there. But when we talk about experiences, then how do the experiences or trauma, as we now understand that there is trauma even in the little things, right?
Mm.
How do those things then affect us or get us stuck? How is it that something that happened when I was 3 years old, um, is now, as I'm trying to have a career or start a business, start a family, raise my children, and those things are somehow showing up in different ways, in my life. How does that happen?
Yeah, it's crazy how emotional energies can lodge themselves in the body and subconscious, and then affect the way that you make decisions for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And until there's some kind of healing in the energetic realm that can either release that or transmute it into something that's useful for you. Because at the time it was useful for you, because that's how you were making sense of the world and of yourself. but then that anchored you, or those experiences ground us in the emotion, and that's why it becomes trapped. So I work with energy, and I do a lot of energy healing around these exact, like a lot of these emotional energies, and then restructuring after, because it's one thing to release it. There are multiple ways to release the emotional energy, but then we have to restructure and reorder the beliefs that were attached to those emotions. Part of your worldview that has kept you trapped in that cycle over and over again. So it does take some restructuring, but it's not as painful as it sounds. Having to rebuild it.
Yeah, sometimes it sounds like a lot of work. It's like, what do I have to do exactly? Yeah, well, talk about that a little bit, because again, I like that you said that the thoughts that we had, or the trauma, the response back then was useful, because just in that releases and that frees us up to know that, look, in the moment, whatever was going on, even if it's something simple as, I'll give you an example. You work with that. I When I was, I don't know how old I was. It was school age. I remember being in my uniform, and we were at the grocery store in the vegetable aisle, and uh, my mother, I guess I volunteered, or she sent me to go get something, which I think it was cucumbers. Um, and I went and got them. And then I came back to her, or who I thought was her. And I said, I got the cucumbers. I think it was cucumbers. I have it. And I'm jumping around. I'm so excited, right? Turns out it was not her, and she was behind me, and I think it was my sister who was kind of like laughing. Oh no, we're over here, but not like mocking me, but just like, you something silly happened and you giggle. But I took it very, very, obviously I still remember this though. So I took it really hard. I guess maybe that I messed up, or I missed something, right? Um, and this experience came back to my memory just a few weeks ago, because my daughter, my youngest, we were outside at an event, and I had a pink dress on, and she went to somebody else and said, "Hey, mommy," and the girl had a pink dress, similar color, coral colored as well, and um, and right away I was like, "Don't laugh, don't laugh." Don't laugh. And I said, the lady she's very nice. She just wanted to say, "Oh no, mommy's over there." And I said, "I'm here," and she came to me. But it was such a, like, don't laugh, don't giggle, don't say anything bad about the situation. You just be so nice to her, because I remembered how I felt. And so I'm like, different things just stick with us, that you think is so random. I mean, if I tell my mother and my sister that, I'm like, I don't even remember the story, right? But it's stayed with me, all these years, and it actually has come back several times in my life. I have no clue why. And so when you think about stuff like that, how is it that something so simple can become, can carry trauma, right? And follow us for so long in our lives?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because like to us as adults, we're like, oh man, that's so trivial. Like, just
Right.
let it go, to that little child. And yet, we're still, as adults, if you put things in perspective, we are still making trivial things really big.
Yes.
So to the child, we say we want to dismiss it and say, oh, it's really not that big of a deal. Can you just let it go?
Mhm.
But something happens to us in those moments where, I mean, there's like what you're describing. I'm hearing humiliation,
Mhm.
terror, because you didn't know where your mom was. For a brief second, you're like,
Or
did I
yeah,
lose
yeah.
her? Am I lost? And then of course there's this like, oh well, there's this other woman, and you thought you were attached to her, but then you weren't, and so there's a lot of confusion that
Mhm.
seems like it got lodged in that moment. Why did that happen? I don't know, but and why does it follow you? I don't know.
Mhm.
There's some bigger lesson in there, even as trivial as that seems.
Mhm.
But I think this continues to happen for us as adults. And it really is a bigger lesson in how not so serious life is.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you put your wingspan out, like your arms out from side to side, and you just that whole span represents all of history,
Mm-hmm.
and then you file off just the tip of your fingernail, you've just eliminated all of human existence. Like, that's how small everything is, right?
Right.
And
That's
so
true.
now we look back at experiences like, what happened to you in the grocery store, wherever it was, and you're like, but that's just like so trivial. And yet right now, today, we're
Mm-hmm.
still latching onto certain events, and maybe it's like, oh my gosh, I owe $100,000. How am I ever going to pay it back, or whatever it is? It seems so much bigger, and yet we're making it big based on our belief about
Mm-hmm.
whether or not we can handle it, about
Right.
whether or not we're worthy of it having a good outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, that's just like the layers of our inner child coming to
Mm-hmm.
the surface, having the same issue that she had back in the grocery store.
Right. Yeah, I think it manifests in different aspects of our lives without us even knowing, or noticing that, and or seeing the link, right? It's like, why do we have this reaction, and we don't realize that it was something trivial, but we attach so much, I guess, so much importance, so much meaning, maybe, to
Mm-hmm.
it, right? Or like you said, it came with different feelings, all of those things together, and then we realize, okay, it's coming along with us, right, throughout life.
Mm-hmm. And another layer, other layers of that would be like, I'm misplaced, right? So
Mm,
what we can do with that is reframe the experience,
mm,
which is what I do in my work, is just take simple things like that if it happened, or not as simple things, more complex things, and reframe it and be able to relive the experience in your mind, but with a different outcome and a different story. So it doesn't
mm,
have all of those same attachments, and we can release ourselves from the toxic cords of
mm.
those events and
Right.
bridge something new for ourselves.
Right, right. I like that. Releasing the toxic cores. I was teaching my kids about that, where how you're attached, to different people, and if the bond that you have is toxic, and how can you release, I guess, the toxicity and have a bond of kindness, and a bond of love, or love thoughts, maybe, over towards the person.
Mm.
Uh, so yeah, I just thought about that. Um, so tell us a little bit about, so you talked about energy healing, which for some might be like, okay, we don't even know what that is at all.
Mm-hmm.
But then you talked about reframing, and so what are methods that we can use when we find ourselves, or when we don't know that experiences have affected us, or we identified a few at least. What can we do um, ourselves, and who can we reach out to help us, put all the pieces back in the right order.
Yeah. And how do we do it and save ourselves like a couple decades of therapy or something, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes, please.
because I spent, like
Mhm.
almost 2 decades in therapy before I
Uh,
realized there were easier ways to do this. And there's certainly a place for traditional therapy, but
mm,
if you want to really make the impact that you're looking to make in the world and not have those things hold you back from being able to launch forward into what you're really wanting to create, but you're too afraid to create it, then
mm,
yeah, we need some other modalities, don't we? So,
right.
um, some of I would say, because you asked the question, how can we do that on our own? And I do certainly teach people how to do that on their own. And also, I
Mm,
think it really requires us to have some outside assistance at times,
mm,
because it
mm,
helps us to validate not just what we've experienced, but what the possibility is to recreate out of our
mm,
experience. And that
mm.
that can be really challenging to do, because then you're so much in your head that you don't,
Yes.
sometimes you're like, I don't know if I'm doing this any justice. Uh,
Mhm,
and to be fair to yourself, it's really helpful to have somebody who can reflect back to you from the outside. But as a starter, I would
mhm,
say that if you're wanting to be able to release and transmute what's there and reprogram and reframe, then it just starts with you noticing first and foremost what your thoughts are. So scripture says, take every thought captive. This is exactly why, because it's in our thoughts first that we start creation. And if you're experiencing challenging emotions on a day-to-day basis, like anxiety or any kind of depression, or maybe you're not willing to admit you have anxiety or depression, maybe it's something, you're willing to admit that at least I'm worried, or I feel out of control. Then first we have to give ourselves space to tap into that emotion and see where it comes from, and to not bypass it, because part of the reason why emotions get lodged in the first place is because we haven't processed them properly. And so just giving ourselves space to feel, and Western society, we just want to take a pill and kind of get rid of the pain as quickly as possible. But sometimes, that sort of leaves those pieces of ourselves, those inner child pieces of ourselves that have already been wounded, in further abandonment. So if your like 3 or 4-year-old self already feels abandoned, then don't bring further abandonment. And it's almost like to try to bypass that is to try to force your inner child across a big scary bridge. Like, you're like, cross the bridge, dang it. Like, why won't you just cross the bridge? When it's not ready, she's not ready to do that. And so it really requires us, because our parents, God love them, but they're not coming back to finish the job. So we have to parent those parts of ourselves that need completion and nurturing and parenting. And that's a process, but it starts first with acknowledging what those emotions are, where they might be coming from, and then to go to those moments with ourselves back there, because those pieces of ourselves are stuck back in that moment. That's why we can feel so fragmented. And then bring healing and wholeness, and bring those parts of ourselves into the present moment, where then we can reframe the story and restructure from there.
Wow, that's so interesting. That's amazing, but it's also bringing so much hope too. I'm in between where, I don't want to peel, but I don't want to be talking for 2 hours either about the situation. Like, can we fix it effectively? So it, I would say gone, but healed and reframed, as you're saying, because that's one thing too. Sometimes we want to just forget and ignore and push things aside, and we're looking for a way for it to disappear, right? But you've never said that so far. You never said, forget about it or toss it away. You're saying, we heal from it, we build from it, right? And then we can move from victim or suffering, right, to a point where now we are building and we're the hero, I guess, of the story, but never so much ignoring, suppressing, or forgetting, or getting over, to those kind of words that we've used, right?
Right. That creates a lot more toxicity, and that's often where we find physical ailments in the body, is rooted in those emotions that we've refused to look at. But even with disease in the body, we can, if people find themselves in disease, that doesn't mean that they can't release themselves from that as well. It just means, okay, you know what, now's the time to buckle down and look at these emotions.
Yeah. Those first signs, of just even simple pains and things like that, they let us know, okay, it's a red flag, it's a signal, it's an alarm, let us know, okay, there's something that we need to work on. But I think in our society, just because we're always on the go and everything, it's like, again, is there a pill, or is there something that I can take, or that I can do quickly, that's going to make it go away, right? Which it doesn't go away. It's just you don't feel it, you don't think about it, but it didn't go away, right? It didn't really disappear. It's still there in you.
That's right.
Yeah, it's masked, it's suppressed, but it's there, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Sometimes we need to sit with ourselves in the darkness a little bit.
Yeah, but that's scary.
I know. Which is why, it is nice to have somebody from the outside that is like there to say, you know what, because your subconscious mind is going to try to protect you from feeling those emotions, because you've been convinced and wired to believe that you're going to die if you feel that. That pain is so extreme that you're going to die. And so you can thank yourself for protecting yourself so well to not allow you to feel that. I mean, there's even a gratitude in that. And
Mm-hmm.
yet sometimes having somebody from the outside to say, you know what, I'm walking with you in it, even if it's just a friend who
Mm-hmm.
will support you, or a spouse, a partner, is I'm walking with you in it, and I'm not going to let you die. Like
Right.
nobody's going to die here by feeling
Mm-hmm.
this. We're just going to walk it together. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's the thing too, that in connection there's a lot of healing that takes place, because then we're like, oh, we feel like we'll be disconnected if we see our brokenness.
Right.
But no, actually, that it bridges connection when we find someone that is willing to walk with us and sit with us in it and be with us in it, and not force,
Right.
try to fix it or try to
Mm-hmm.
gloss over it, come with their tool bag and all that.
I'm guilty. I want to fix it right away. But yeah, it's true. When we sit with our feelings and emotion and memories, but in a safe space, right? In a safe space, because sometimes what we're surrounded with, the people that we're surrounded with, is like you can't even express, you can't even feel, because it's like, well, what's wrong with you? What's going on? Again, get over it, move on. It's been 20 years. There's nothing you can do about it. It's gone. It's whatever. The person died, or she's gone. She's married. She's whatever, or it can just be anything. Or you lost that football game when you were in middle school and you're still on it.
Yeah.
All of those different things, that we have going on, and sometimes when we try to express them, or we're going through a dark time, right? But we look around and people are looking at us weirdly, and then we look around, we might feel alone, or we might feel like there's nobody that can really get what I'm going through, or help me understand, what I'm going through as
Mhm.
well. So that's the importance of people like you, right? To
Yes.
help us sort it out.
Yes, and we need that to remind us that we're connected to something so much deeper
Mm-hmm.
than our circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a source being who has a personality, who truly cares about us and wants to make right all of those toxic connections and give us a full connection to his heart,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can have a clean connection with something that is not going anywhere.
Right, right, right. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I thought about, so as we're saying all this, you might still have somebody that says, "Well, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. I live life, or I'm successful." For example, you work with people who actually are pretty very successful, high performing leaders and entrepreneurs, and so you might have people that have achieved, that have degrees, that have great jobs, or great marriage. At least it seems like, or just great life, or just standard, like I checked all the boxes, things are going well, and this does not necessarily apply to me because I feel, I'm okay.
Mhm.
um, how do again, how do our experiences in our trauma and those things that have built us, right, manifest in our day-to-day practically? If there's something that you can say, if you experience this, or if you react that way, or if you have those kind of feelings, it may be that uh, it's traced back to something. Do you
Mm,
have examples that you can give people? How do things manifest or present themselves, come back up, over time?
yeah. Well, I think if we're all really honest with ourselves, there's always something. It doesn't matter how much we've achieved. And
Right.
actually, high achievement in most cases can make it even harder, because if you have so many beautiful things in your life, it's almost like, who are you to feel this way? You shouldn't feel that way. You shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
feel this way because your life is so good. And so as for high achievers, it's almost like we're like, I'm smart and therefore I'm supposed to know differently. I'm supposed to know how to do this differently, and that compounds the original emotion that we already have that is unresolved, because now we have an emotion, we don't know what to do with it. And I feel like I'm not supposed to feel it because my life doesn't reflect it at this moment, why I should feel that way. And so I've worked with one high achiever after another, after another, after another. And it seems like the common strain between all of them is this, that it doesn't matter how many accolades they have. They can have certificates and awards all around them hanging on their walls, money in the bank, multi-millions of dollars, but they still feel on a foundational level like there's something missing and like they're not enough. And I don't mean to say that because I think that you're broken, because I don't actually think any of us are really broken. I think that we're very, very healed. It's just that we haven't come into full agreement with it in every area, right? So that's part of the peeling back of the layers that we have over the course of a lifetime, is to come into deeper agreement with that over time. But I don't believe that any honest person can say, oh, I don't have anything in my past. I think that that's all, continuing to turn a blind eye to those things. And that's okay, because it doesn't mean, maybe it's not for today. Maybe it's not for today. But, I tend to look at where, like you said in the beginning, relationships, health, and wealth or career all connect together. And I don't believe that we can have all of those things in place at all times, because wherever we're putting our focus is where our energy is going, and that's where things are going to be the best. So if you're working really, really hard on your career, then you're going to have success in your career if you continue at it. But you might find that, my relationships aren't what they really could be, or my, maybe it's not all relationships. Maybe it's just relationship with a spouse or relationship with your children. So there's always something more that we can work on. And there are always reasons why we're not working on it, if we're not, or that we're not farther along and it's not as good as it could be.
Right. Yeah, a lot for me to think about too. We've had conversations too, but yeah, I think it just, if we're really, really honest with ourselves, we realize that there's just, I don't say little holes or little gaps or different patterns that we see that come up, and those things, not ignoring them, and understanding that, hey, let me just decide, pick one thing, and let's focus on that and see, where does that lead me? Like you said, sitting with our experience, sitting in the thoughts and in the feelings for a while, and just see, I think our society just kind of puts, they're all up in their feelings, as they say. But we try to really, not feel, right, and not stop and not take the time, and it's actually hurting us, more than we think, more than we even perceive, right?
Yeah. And I mean, of course, we're going to go wherever we know we can win. So if you know you can win in your career, you're going to spend more time there than you do with your kids. If you feel like maybe I'll be inadequate as a parent, then you'll spend more time where you feel like you can succeed. But I think the point is for us to be integrated beings,
Right.
to have authenticity and abundance everywhere. And if you're killing it in one area and everything else is going south in another area, then are you really successful?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like success is it should be integrated everywhere. And I think it's totally possible for us to have that, but it does require us to look at some things that
Right.
we've left under the shelf for a while.
I like that, integrated success. Okay. Yeah, because you cannot say that you're successful if you have one aspect that's really high and then the other one that's pretty low, right? But as you heal, then it start to, the other one is kind of match, right? Or do they? It may be some seesaw going on at some point, but in the process can be a little messy, right?
Yeah, but you know what? At the core of it is, I mean, your career it's not who you are, right? It's just a reflection of what you are doing. And it's the same in relationships or in your health. It's just a reflection of what you're doing. And it's totally separate from who you are. And the trick is, how do you find homeostasis in who you are? And that in itself makes all of those areas better by default. So you actually shouldn't have to work that hard. I mean, what we're talking about sounds like you've got to really break a sweat and do a lot of things that don't feel good. but it's not necessarily the case. I think that there can be more of a flow to it, and it can
Mm-hmm.
be easy, even if it hurts a little. It
Right.
can be easy, but it's really bringing yourself to balance more than trying
Mm.
to spin all these plates and balance everything on your hands and your head.
Ah, okay. So you're saying, working on, I'll let you rephrase that, but working on balancing and I guess understanding who we are and our self-awareness, self-understanding, and then things fall into place. And because it seems like again, what I was saying, target one thing, target this situation or that situation, or family or career or this or that, targeting something. I feel like we have to work on that, and and then work on something else, and then work on something else. If we start with the core being, right, then it kind of
Yes.
spans out, branches out to everything else.
Yes, because all of those areas of your life, again, they're separate from your identity. So if you're looking to the outside world to
Mm-hmm.
change in order for you to feel different, well, I got my career right. So now if I only get my relationships right and my health,
Yeah,
then
yeah.
I'll be in working order. But
Mm-hmm.
actually, it's the opposite. No,
Mm-hmm.
you get yourself within a state of being that is as I said, like homeostasis is like the balance. See, balance is a trigger word, I've noticed, where if you say, oh, you got to bring things to balance, people go, oh, it's not
Yes.
balance, it's harmony. Well, you can't have harmony without balance. And I
Mm-hmm.
think people have looked at balance like it is that, oh, I'm spinning multiple plates and I have to
Mm-hmm.
juggle like, I'm like on a high rope trying
Mm-hmm.
to balance all these things. That's not what balance is. Balance is internal.
Right.
It's bringing yourself. You're stable. You're
Mm-hmm.
stable. You're the eye of the storm. That's what balance is. The storm is still
Mm-hmm.
going on all around you. You're always going to have
Right.
your children, your spouse, your work. Everything is going to always be swirling around you. It's not changing anytime soon. But
Mm-hmm.
if you are the eye of the storm, then it doesn't really matter.
Right.
That's a marking of real success, is when you're stable and steady,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can also think clearly about what's going on and how to you make better decisions about what to do with what's going
Right.
on around you, but that's still separate from who you are,
Right. Right.
because
Right.
you could be an utter you kind of see utter failure in your life in multiple areas, and then you're like, well, you know what, I've done all this work, I know that I'm still okay. So you're grounded in something that's deeper than yourself, deeper than your experiences, I should say.
Right. I love that. I love that. Yeah. And again, scriptural, we always go back to the scripture, but when you think about this sense of peace, when I talk about inner peace and the eye of the storm and all those different things, how we stand, again, in God, and how it's really bringing us that that peace and that balance and that harmony and homeostasis and all the words that we're in congruence and everything that we want to use. But it's like this, right? So from top to and to our mind and our brain and then our heart and then our body, and then it comes out
That's
to
right.
all the different aspects of our lives. And but oftentimes we try to just start from out everything that's going on and then try to bring it back to order, right? But we
Right.
can't bring that to order, and that goes with your it's energy, right? It
Yeah.
starts from within. It starts from within, and when you can organize that, then everything, or not all of a sudden, but it over time, and as you continue to work towards things, it comes into place. Just like you said, we can be in chaos, you can have everything falling apart, and then you don't fall apart, right?
Right.
That's the key. If you don't fall apart and you say, okay, I see what's going on, I know who I am. I understand what's going on. So, all right, now we go into action. Okay, this situation for shooting in your above your head, but having peace in that moment, but also making some resolution. Okay, I'm going to make some changes, and so it triggers again the hero and not the victim. Right?
That's
It doesn't cripple us. It doesn't.
right.
It actually brings life. You can bring life into even a situation like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's awesome. I could talk all day about
Yeah.
about this. I know you can. That's what you do every day.
Yeah.
That's awesome. But we have come to the hour already. And so I was asking if there's a last word or last advice or before we talk about well, let's talk about how we can reach you first, and then you're gonna give us a last word, closing word of encouragement there.
Yeah, for sure. If you want to reach me, you can reach me at soleilventure.com. There's a form on there, or soleilventure@gmail.com.
Mhm.
And we can communicate through there. I'm also on all the socials, so you can find me
Mhm.
on there as well. Joy Soleil.
Joy Soleil. Awesome, awesome. So, so what would you leave with us on this topic or several topics that we explored? We just really just touched on, but what would you leave with us? A word of encouragement or something to, um, I guess, keep us going.
Yeah. Well, I'm a firm believer. If you want to see healing in the world, you have to start with yourself. And
Mhm.
um, before you try to make any kind of justice or vindication, uh, take a step back and, as we just mentioned a moment ago, like deal with the things inside of you that can help bring you to being the eye of the storm, bring that harmony, that balance, if I may,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, because that's transferable to the people around you. And when you get yourself right, you start to see, energy wise, we're going to see changes around us
Mhm.
as we raise our vibration, our own vibration, our own level of consciousness. And the people around us will be forced to either level up with us or disappear, for lack of a better word. Um,
Right.
but yeah, that healing is for ourselves is essential first and foremost. I think that especially as women, that's like we want to go heal
Mhm.
everybody else first and hope that we'll also get it returned to us. But that's not really how it works. We really have to start with inside of ourselves. So
Mhm. Awesome, awesome. Starts from within. It starts within. Thank you so much, Joy Soleil, for this interview today. Thank you for this teaching. I will be watching this again to take it in.
good.
Um, and so, for the viewers, for those who are watching it live as this episode is airing, if you're watching on the replay, please feel free to leave your comments. Joy and I will be watching if anybody has any questions. And again, you can find Joy on Joy Soleil on all the social media platform and soleilventures.com, right?
Soleil Venture, that's singular.
Soleilventure.com.
.com.
And fill out the form and have a conversation with her. And you can see if she can help you or at least get you on the path to understanding to unlock something, that can help you. So thank you guys for being with us on this episode of our Mind Body podcast on 39 Down. And I will see you next time. Until then, live well and love.